This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform. More about them later in the video. Many comedians' stories seem to follow similar patterns. Think of Chris Farley and John Belushi. Humble beginnings, stable environments, went into comedy, and died young as a result of the excesses of the lifestyle they were living. Of course, it's not always the case. Some comedians have rather simple lives, nothing overdramatic, like Norm Macdonald. He didn't have major substance abuse issues, just a gambling problem. He died due to illness, not unfortunate choices. But what does this have to do with Bernie Mac? Nothing. Literally nothing. His story is so incredibly different and infinitely more tragedy-filled. Mac might be one of the most fascinating comedians to have ever existed. His life was not a funny one. Humor existed only where he made it. Otherwise, it was filled with difficult days, harsh realities, and a great deal of death. What makes Max so interesting is the way his life and career happened. It was far slower than that of some of the other comedians we've covered, whose rises were expeditious. He struggled to break out for a long time. It was as if he was always on the cusp of greatness, never quite getting over the final bump. Then he did, and he enjoyed an amazing career. His ultimate success is by far the least interesting part of his story, though. It's everything that happened and all he did to achieve it that shows Bernie Mac in all his glory, and it's one hell of a story.
This is going to be fun, I can tell already.
Welcome back to Biographics. I'm your host, Eric Malachite, and today's script was provided by James CJ, so be sure to show them some love as you deploy your likes and do all the things that help keep the eldritch beast that is the YouTube algorithm going. Let's get to it. From the moment Bernie Mac was born, Bernard Jeffrey McCullough, on October 5, 1957, he didn't have it easy. Mac was raised in the south side of Chicago, Illinois, in a rough neighborhood that was at times unforgiving. He was the second surviving child born to Jeffrey Harrison and Mary McCullough, with his older brother Darrell rounding out the family of four. His family was far from wealthy. In fact, they were dirt poor, but they got by. At some point during his early years, although not expressly defined when, his father left. And this was not long before or after the death of Mac's youngest brother, who died in infancy. Mac, along with his mother and brother, moved in with their grandparents in Inglewood. Bernie grew up in a strict household where emotions were kept in check and complaining was suppressed. They counted their blessings more than their misfortunes, of which they had many. From a young age, Bernie learned that the most powerful thing in the world was laughter and making people laugh. Unbeknownst to Mac, his mother Mary was very sick most of his childhood. One night when he was 4, Bernie saw her crying. He wasn't aware at the time that it was due to the pain she was experiencing, but he went to her and asked her why she was crying. While she didn't tell him the reason, he sat with her for a moment as the TV played. He watched as Bill Cosby took the stage, and when he began his set, Mary's crying turned to laughter. It was as if the pain had vanished, replaced by brief, unfiltered joy. It wasn't lost on Mac. He saw the power of comedy right then and there. So, at 4 years old, he looked at his mother and told her, "Mama, that's what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a comedian, so I don't ever have to see you cry no more." From then on, any chance Bernie got, he tried to make people laugh. In his youth, Mac didn't really understand the ins and outs of comedy and the fine art of telling jokes. However, it was clear he had a natural talent for it, even if he didn't yet fully understand the craft. His grandparents were strict, and he loved using them as material early on, doing impressions of them to his grandfather's congregation, much to his grandfather's dismay, who was the priest.
He's a very naughty boy!
Growing up, Mac didn't have much. The family did little more than simply survive. Mac, in his 2 biographies, wrote about how they rarely had much food in the house, and as a young kid, he just believed this was how everyone lived. Maybe that made it easier to endure, not knowing the other side of the coin. Living on the south side in a bad neighborhood meant you easily came into contact with unsavory characters without even trying. There was even a point when Mac was forced, through acts of violence, to join a gang. He did leave the next day with the help of his brother, though. These were just some of the many challenges a young Bernie Mac faced, but none of them could have prepared him for the first domino that would fall. and the many that followed over the course of more than a decade. Bernie Mac was about to become very familiar with death. If you want your business to be as iconic as Bernie Mac's comedy, then you're going to need a snazzy website. And the sponsor for today's video, Squarespace, has you covered. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform perfect for entrepreneurs and hobbyists alike. Recently, I needed to make a simple website for a tabletop RPG I'm developing and playtesting to make looking through the rulebook easier. And it was beyond simple to add sections, format, and even incorporate my existing knowledge of CSS and HTML, though you don't need any knowledge in that area at all. And it's all thanks to Squarespace's innovative Fluid Engine. The Fluid Engine makes it easier than ever for pretty much anyone to dive in and make a beautiful website, answer a few questions about the goals you'd like to accomplish with your site, choose a template, and get dragging and dropping elements onto your template. Drag and drop technology is included in every Squarespace site. But that's not all, because if you're working on a long-term project like the tabletop RPG I just mentioned, Squarespace makes it easy for you to create members-only content for your community. Monetize your projects by selling access to online courses, blogs, videos, and memberships. Start with a fully customizable website and earn recurring revenue by gating your content behind a paywall. Simply set the price and choose whether to charge a one-time fee or subscription for access. And then use Squarespace email campaigns to make it easy for you to spread the word about your project, engage clients, promote your services, and grow your business. Plus, if you're also as busy as I am, you can even set up email automations to stay connected, nurture leads, and save time. Ready to get started? Head to squarespace.com/biographics for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use offer code biographics to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now back to the video. Mac was close with his family, specifically his mother and grandmother. He wasn't close at all with his brother Daryl, whom he constantly wrote about, with Mac saying Daryl would beat him up insistently and be horrible to him while growing up. While Mac loved and looked up to his brother, Daryl never seemed to give him the time of day, and when he did, it wasn't pleasant. Bernie's father Jeffrey would appear several times throughout his life for brief periods. They were never enjoyable visits. In one instance, he arrived late to visit, and when he did, he asked Mac, a young child, for money to buy ice cream for them. Instead, he took the money and left, not to be seen until his next attempt years later. What a dick. From that moment, Bernie didn't want a relationship with his father. He wasn't interested. And seriously, who could blame him? In 1974, Mary's condition had deteriorated dramatically. She was evidently sick, and it was impossible to ignore or hide it anymore. One August morning, he came in to talk to his mother before heading off to school. By the time he got home, his mother had passed away. Mac was just 16 when he lost his mother. This wasn't the first death he'd experienced, but it was the first to leave a major mark. It would become just another of the many deaths Bernie Mac would experience before he turned 30. In the aftermath of Mary's passing, his aunt Evelyn was granted guardianship of Bernie. Evelyn wasn't up to the task of being Bernie's guardian, but it didn't matter much. Evelyn and Bernie remained with the grandparents, and life moved on. It wouldn't even be a year after Mary passed that Bernie would attend another funeral. This time, it was his brother Daryl. While their relationship was far from perfect and Daryl was almost a stranger to Bernie, this was just as hard as losing his mother. He died after experiencing chest pains. Daryl's girlfriend wanted to call an ambulance, but he refused, and when he stood up, he felt dizzy, sat back down, and put his head between his legs. The second time he stood up, he gulped air, tipped over backward, and was gone. While there was more to come, there was a moment of sunshine amongst all the rain. Bernie fell in love, and with it, a family began. By this point, Mac was still making people laugh, but he was no closer to being a comedian than he was when he was 4. He was close to graduating high school and about to go to prom with his girlfriend Jerry. When she broke up with him, he almost didn't go to the dance, but his grandmother urged him to go with Rhonda Gore. So he went over to her house and asked her out. Her mother said yes for her, and from there, their love story began. It wasn't a perfect relationship by any means, but it was real and pure. The two were mad for each other. By now, the two had graduated from high school. Rhonda was studying to be a nurse, and Mac was a college dropout working odd jobs. When Rhonda fell pregnant, she went to Cleveland, unsure whether 21-year-old Mac was ready to be a father. But Bernie knew what it was like to have an absent father figure, and he refused to let that be his kid's experience too. The two moved in together, determined to make it work. But before his daughter was born, his father would come up again. This time it wasn't to see him, though. At 52, Jeffrey Harrison's kidneys had given out, and he was dead. It would be a moment of peace for Bernie following his father's death, something I can relate to. It would be a while before he'd get such news again. Now was for his family, the brightest part of his existence. On January 21st, 1978, Janice McCullough was born. The next decade of Mac's life was far from easy, but what's new? Bernie would go from job to job, sometimes juggling multiple at once. He was constantly the victim of downsizing, bad luck, or false accusations. Rhonda eventually earned her degree and became the main breadwinner. In these years, Mac began finding his way to comedy, starting to perform on stages across Chicago at amateur nights. From there, he'd get requests to do birthday parties, funerals, and other events.
Yeah, I'll throw in a wedding every now and then, but funerals are insane.
He'd also perform for passengers on the subway for fun. Any chance he got, he made people laugh. It wasn't paying any bills, but it was something. During these years, Rhonda could see her husband's desire, but she was worried about her family. They were constantly having to move because job losses left them behind on rent. Landlords wanted their apartments back for family members, and other such issues along the way. She didn't believe chasing comedy was a good idea, but to Mac's credit, he made sure he had a job and didn't just decide on his own to go into comedy without first bringing in a steady income. During these years, Mac would lose both grandparents. These were less tragic losses for Bernie since both were getting on in years. Perhaps the most profound loss was the death of his closest friend, Billy Staples. The tale of Billy Staples' death haunted Bernie Mac, perhaps for his entire life. For a while, Staples had been dating a woman Mac couldn't stand. In Mac's words, she was controlling, jealous, violent, and crazy. Mac and Staples hung out all the time, with Staples often joining Mac at the comedy clubs and watching his friend perform. After one particularly violent fight between Staples and his girlfriend, which resulted in Staples being run over by his girlfriend, Bernie began noticing a change. Billy was coming out less, he was harder to reach, and it was becoming increasingly clear that something bad was happening. For a long time, Mac had tried to get Billy to see she was no good for him, but he never seemed to listen. One particularly snowy day in Chicago, Billy phoned Bernie and asked him to come get him. But the snow was so thick that the roads were buried, and driving wasn't even possible. He wanted to go, but his friends convinced him that he wouldn't make it in that weather. You knew if Billy wanted out, it had to be bad. He kept calling Billy to make sure he was okay, but he couldn't get a hold of him. That day, Billy Staples was fatally shot by his girlfriend. For Mac, this was a loss unlike any other. It was on the same level as his mother. He'd been friends with Billy since he was a kid. What made it worse was that he blamed himself for not going, for not trying to get Staples to leave his girlfriend sooner. When it went to trial, she got off with probation, claiming she killed him in self-defense. But Bernie knew differently. This death haunted him. He could not shake that feeling of guilt for a long time. It's unsurprising that the death of Billy was one of the lowest points in Bernie Mac's life. While he'd experienced a great deal of death already, this one was harder to swallow than most. For a while, Mac was somewhat lost. He was angry about what had happened, and this came across in his performances. While he continued to perform and his heart was certainly in it, it was clear that at this moment in his career, he wasn't sure about much of what he was trying to say. Things would take a major turn after Rhonda suggested the two of them go on a trip to Vegas, and that trip would change everything. In Vegas, Bernie saw his idol, Red Fox, performing on the Strip. After managing to get tickets and somehow making their way to their seats, they found themselves backstage, opening the door to find Red Fox on the other side. Bernie introduced himself, letting Fox know he was a comedian too. You'd think that would be the end of the story, that they were turned away and went to their seats to enjoy the show. But instead, Fox decided to offer Mac 5 minutes on the stage as one of his openers. After he performed for 5 minutes, Fox signaled for him to keep going. Eventually, he wrapped up, and offstage, Fox and his stage partner Slappy gave him some sage advice. Be real. Use the stuff that's buried way down. Don't be afraid to fail, and stop trying to be liked. Audiences familiar with Mac likely saw the difference in his sets. Shaped by the advice of Red Fox and using the rawness of his life and the death of Billy, Mac wasn't the same comedian he'd been before. Perhaps it was for the best because it shaped the Bernie Mac we came to love. Unlike before, Bernie wasn't seeking approval or validation. Instead, he was brutally honest, angry, and had a fearlessness that existed before, but not like this. The old Bernie slipped in here and there, like one particular instance in Vegas where he bombed hard, shattering Mac. It was a low point, forcing him to commit to being authentic and to take the pain he'd accumulated over the years and own it. In between all this, life at home remained tense. After learning that his landlord was scamming him by charging him for the gas bills of multiple apartments as they all ran on his line, Mac told the landlord he wasn't paying and was moving out. After finding a place, the landlord sent goons while Bernie was thankfully home alone. They beat him up, and after they fled following police sirens, Mac went to get his gun. This, in turn, resulted in his arrest due to the firearm being unlicensed. He told his friend to go make sure his house was safe while he was locked up, and by the time his friend got there, it had been tossed. Eventually, they moved. Bernie was out and back on stage, his face still a mess from the fight. However, this was an important moment for Mac. It felt like it transformed him and changed him for the better, made him funnier, sharper, and in his memoir, Maybe You Never Cry, he wrote, "I felt like calling up my landlord and thanking him. I felt like tracking down the 3 goons who'd beat me up and buying them a round of drinks. These men had pushed me to a whole new level. I owed them." The timing was perfect. He was about to join the spotlight like never before, and he needed to be the best version of himself, the authentic Bernie Mac. In 1992, Mac appeared on HBO's Def Comedy Jam. How he got to that stage was a combination of factors. He built up an impressive reputation in the Chicago comedy scene and was respected and sought after at numerous clubs across the city. In 1985, prior to Staples' death, he won the Miller Lite Comedy Search and was beginning to become more of a headliner than just another act. He had that Red Fox exposure moment, and finally, he began branching out beyond Chicago. Honestly, he mainly goes to the Def Comedy Jam stage through word of mouth. His hard work hadn't been for nothing. It made a difference in getting him noticed by the right people. He walked on stage and opened with,
"I ain't scared of you motherfuckers."
He started like this because the previous act bombed and the audience was hostile. So he went in, guns blazing, and challenged them rather than appeasing them. This nationally televised event showcased Bernie Mac at his most authentic, and audiences loved what they saw. This moment was a true turning point that elevated Bernie Mac to another level of success. Almost immediately, bookings increased and Mac was busier than ever. No longer was Mac the opener for the main event. He was the main event, the headliner. In 1992, he began appearing in movies, with his first being Mo Money. From there, he'd appear in films like Friday, Don't Be a Menace, How to Be a Player, and Life, among others. Let us know which is your favorite down in the comments. Although, probably it's going to be like mine, Bernie Mac Show, right? This was the time in Bernie's life when he experienced material changes. The struggle was over. He was doing well, supporting his family the way he'd wanted to for years. He'd always provided, but he always wanted to provide more for those he loved most. Despite earning more money, Mac was never reckless. He'd found success later in life. He was hardwired as a person by now, and that served him well in handling a level of fame he'd yet to experience. The 90s may have been his rise to fame, but by 2000, he'd made it, no question. Following Bernie's appearance on the original Kings of Comedy, Featuring Mac, Steve Harvey, Cedric the Entertainer, and D.L. Hughley, this nationwide stand-up comedy tour was filmed in Charlotte, North Carolina, and directed by the rising director Spike Lee. It was released in 2000 and became a massive success, cementing all four comedians as cultural icons. With this success, Hollywood came knocking, wanting Mac on TV. After all this time, Mac had achieved unbelievable success, and he'd done it on his own terms. The early 2000s were kind to Bernie Mac. He'd been working at it for decades, but here he was, a big star. He appeared in movies like Ocean's 11, 12, and 13, Guess Who, Charlie's Angels, Full Throttle, Head of State, Bad Santa, and Transformers, among others. But beyond his consistent work on the big screen, he was also enjoying great success on television. In 2001, The Bernie Mac Show we all remember premiered on Fox. After Fox executives saw his stand-up success on Def Jam Comedy and in the original Kings of Comedy, they approached Mac to create his own sitcom. The network wanted a family sitcom around him, and while Mac was skeptical of TV, especially sitcoms, he agreed only on the basis that it would reflect who he really is, not some watered-down version of who he is. His non-negotiables were clear. He wouldn't play it safe. He wouldn't be a stereotypical sitcom dad. He wanted his character to be honest, flawed, blunt, and sometimes wrong. And he wanted the family beyond his character to be believable people. And if Fox were to say yes and then attempt to water it down as the show aired, he'd walk. The Bernie Mac Show was loosely based on his real life, with elements of the premise, house, routines, arguments, and scenes directly drawn from his own experiences growing up. Throughout its successful run, Fox repeatedly pushed for softer jokes, more sentiment, and clearer lessons. But Bernie stuck to his guns, fighting with writers, producers, and executives. He wasn't trying to be difficult. He wanted the show to retain its integrity. Bernie loved The Bernie Mac Show. It was a true labor of love. After 5 seasons, Mac decided it was time to leave television. As it stood, ratings were already declining after a scheduling change, but this was not the primary reason for its ending, as the ratings were still impressive and largely consistent. There were numerous factors contributing to the end of the sitcom, including Bernie's exhaustion, the toll of filming on his health, a sense he'd said what he needed to say, and a fear the show would suffer a quality decline if it overstayed its welcome. He wanted to go out on his own terms, and as usual, he did just that. Even today, The Bernie Mac Show is remembered and beloved by millions, known as a unique sitcom in a time when most played it safe. For those who loved Bernie Mac, they can see him in every aspect of the show. He made it authentically him, and for 5 seasons, people made sure they watched. Mac said he was diagnosed with severe sarcoidosis early in his career, 20 years prior to his death. Sarcoidosis is a chronic inflammatory disease in which clusters of immune cells form in organs, affecting the lungs and lymph nodes, and sometimes the skin, eyes, heart, and nervous system. In Mac's case, it largely affected his lungs. For the most part, to manage his disease with his career, he'd limit show lengths, structure sets more tightly, and take longer recovery time between performances. The Bernie Mac Show was particularly brutal on Mac due to his condition, and once the show ended, in part because of the toll it was taking on his health, he began seeking more ensemble roles and avoided physically demanding roles altogether. For the majority of his career, he managed his disease and barely spoke of it, refusing to be defined by it. But it was sarcoidosis that would indirectly end Bernie Mac's life. On August 1st, 2008, Mac was admitted to Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago. For 3 weeks, he was treated in the ICU for pneumonia. Then on August 9th, he went into cardiac arrest and died in the early hours of the morning. Bernie Mac was only 50. A week later, a memorial for Mac was held at the House of Hope Church. Nearly 7,000 people attended. Among the many guests were his former co-stars, including Chris Rock, Ashton Kutcher, Cedric the Entertainer, and D.L. Hughley. At the time of his death, his final films hadn't been released. They were released posthumously. with Soul Men and Madagascar Escape to Africa debuting several months after his passing. His final posthumously released film and final of his career was Old Dog, starring Robin Williams and John Travolta. Here's the interesting thing about Bernie Mac. His story, once he found fame, isn't all that interesting. Bernie Mac was an exceptionally hard worker. He believed in getting there, doing the job, and going home. A devoted family man, loving husband and father, far from perfect but always trying to get close. He wasn't like many of the comedians we usually talk about, who were heavily into drugs and drinking. Mac was more grounded. He didn't reach that level of fame until his 40s. Maybe that's why he didn't follow the same path. Who can say for sure? His death was tragic. His life was cut short, but it wasn't a result of his lifestyle and choices. It was just a bad hand. What makes Bernie Mac's story so interesting is not what happened after he became famous, but everything that came before. The insurmountable tragedy he experienced, losing family and friends, the struggle many could sympathize with and maybe relate to even today. He never got anything handed to him. He worked harder than anyone in the game, and in the end, here we are, talking about him nearly 2 decades after his death. His fame was hard-earned. He was everywhere and anywhere that would have him, building up his name for decades. It's safe to say there is simply no comedian quite like Bernie Mac, and there may never be again. Even if you didn't love Bernie Mac, on some level you have to admire and respect his hustle and game. He was the master of macabre, turning tragedies into laughter. He was on this earth to make people laugh, and that's what he did, right up until the very end. I hope you learned something today, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment a historical figure we haven't covered yet, subscribe and ring that bell, and share this video with someone who loves learning about history's most important people. I'm Eric Malachite, and we'll see you next time.